Hello, and welcome to another Atlantic Council GeoTech Hour. I'm your host, Dr. David Bray, inaugural director of the Atlantic Council's GeoTech Center, where we're looking at how data and technologies are changing the world, changing societies, and changing how we live as humans. We're here with an august panel today to have an exciting conversation about how modern CIOs, Chief Information Officers, and other C-suite individuals in information-intensive fields can innovate for impact. That includes AI, that includes thinking about how we deal with increasing threats from cyber and ransomware, as well as other things on the horizon, including new technologies that help us with data, making sense of the world, and bringing people together. I'm really excited to have this conversation today with folks, and I want to go to one of my longtime friends and colleagues who is also currently serving as a CIO with the U.S. federal government. I will go to you, Nagesh, to first both introduce yourself, and I actually have the first question for you, which is, why is it essential for modern CIOs to be able to innovate and focus on impact?
Thank you, David, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for inviting me to this program. I find it to be a tremendous honor, and David, you and I have been in the thick of it for years together in government innovation and in inspiring that entrepreneurial kind of mindset to help us get to better answers. So I am G. Nagesh Rao. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Bureau of Industry and Security within the U.S. Department of Commerce. I've had a pretty fun ride so far in my recent stint in federal service. I've been in and out of government over the last 20 years, and when I was recruited back to government, I didn't think I'd be staying as long as I've had, but it's been a fun ride. And this past year, I got appointed into the role as a career civil servant in a SCS fashion to be the CIO for the BIS, and I think it's incredibly a fun, fascinating time for us to help move the needle forward. I think cybersecurity, IT modernization. Just digital transformation has become more and more critical in the way we operate day to day. This pandemic has really shown firsthand how important it is to have a critical and stable foundation for IT infrastructure in order to be able to just do our day-to-day activities. It's been, remote work has been a very fascinating kind of concept, and I think it dovetails into the notion of future of work and whatnot. And so for a chief information officer, I put this question out a lot when in my various roles over the years, and notice it's chief information officer, right? So like, it's not chief technology officer, it's chief information officer for a reason. You're a central pillar, you're part of the nervous system of information that flows in and out across the various silos of the institutions that we serve. And as chief information officer, I would, I'd have these fun conversations with Andre Mendez, who's the CIO, Commerce wide CIO. He's a fantastic leader, and I've loved working with him and for him, along with Jeremy Pelter, who's the deputy undersecretary. We've had these conversations about, is it just purely a technical play, or is it more than that? Technology is a tool in the toolkit, and as a CIO, your job is to help unleash and inform and enable better evidence-based policymaking. And I got to do that firsthand also in my prior role at SBA when I worked for Maria Rowe and Guy Cavallo, both fantastic individuals. Maria, everyone knows, is the federal-wide deputy CIO for the U.S. government now, and Guy just got this past week the permanent gig as CIO for OPM, which I think is a fantastic choice and opportunity. Guy, they get it. They understand that technology is part of the suite of tools that we unleash to help folks be more effective and efficient with their business decisions. And I'll close with this because I know there's an awful lot of conversations around the various tools that we use and whatnot, but I'll pivot real quick to AI, for instance. I don't like to look at it as artificial intelligence. I like to look at it as one of the guys from IBM had said it to me once at a conference a few years ago, and I loved what he said. It's augmented intelligence. You're using those tools to augment the way we conduct ourselves and how we operate. We're not looking to replace. It's more about augmenting and freeing up brain power and time to be able to do more critical thinking. So I'll pause there. Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you, Nagesh. And if I could ask you a real quick rejoinder, because also in addition to everything you've been doing and serving in the federal government, you recently also became a father. And not to put you on the spot, but how has that changed your perspective or shaped your perspective now when you think about the future and where the world is going with how humans are using technology and information in our world? I'd just be real quick interested if you has that changed your style and your perspective both for the future and also leadership as well?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't know if anyone heard in the background, the nursery is right next door to our home office. I'm working from home today because I wanted to have a strong connection. Well, one, I wanted to have a little bit more flexibility for the presentation and whatnot. And two, I can be able to do this briefing without having to be in a secure room and whatnot, given the fact that Bureau of Industry and Security is national security. And so have that frank conversation. One, it's been awesome. I'm the father to our first child. Kaylee and I welcomed our first child ever 3.5 months ago. He's just been a delight. He's growing and developing every day. And yeah, I would say it has definitely augmented the way I've viewed the world a bit more and looking at how technology plays its influential role in the landscape. My wife and I want to make sure we leave a better, brighter future for him. And if we have if we end up having another kid, we want to make sure we leave a brighter future for them. It was funny. Kaylee has made it very clear to me she does not want technology introduced as being like a replacement. It's been awesome watching her she's like reading books. She is sitting down and helping them discover the world. They've been making time to go to the museums and take in the I don't know if anyone's ever studied metaphysics or philosophy. Besides an engineering degree, I also have a background in philosophy, but they call it qualia, right? And so that notion of qualia, matter, like the physical ethereal substance, it's been awesome. It's definitely shaped my views a bit more, that's for certain. I think having nieces and nephews helped shape a lot of it, but having your own child definitely does, bring out new tidbits out of the brain that you would not have suspected otherwise.
Well said, and I think later date maybe we should compare notes, because it is interesting how when you think about how children are absorbing information and what information they're absorbing, like you said, whether it's qualia, the physical things in the world, and later introducing them to the virtual and digital world. I think it's an interesting perspective when you are put in that role as a parent. So thank you for sharing that, Nagesh.
Yeah, and I looked at what you and Diane did with Dylan. Like he's growing up really quickly, but he's absorbing himself. That's why I got the Lego sets. And I know you got me whenever you said those Lego sets for Dylan. But it was like, wait, I know those toys are a pain in the butt when you step on them, but believe me, it's a lot of fun building them.
100%. I'm with you 100%. And I look forward to doing more Legos with them. And that's a good segue. And also what you shared about your perspective on AI being augmented intelligence. That's a good segue to another longtime friend and colleague of the GeoTech Center, Sally Grant. If you could share both a little bit about your background, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. Obviously, you are working a role where you're supporting the federal government, particularly the Department of Defense and intelligence activities. What do you see in terms of why it's so important that we focus on impact, especially in this information-intensive era?
Thank you, David.
Muted. Oh, good. Sorry. Yep, you're good.
Thank you, David. Great to be with you all. Nagesh, so important what you're saying about the augmentation and data science. I know Joanne will echo that to support our soldiers in contested environment. It is so important as we get into machine to machine that our C2, our decision making for ISR, are involved in the process. Critical here for our work. I would have to say, to emphasize a little of my background in cybersecurity, as well as moving into data science and federated machine learning, that education, training, and simulation testing and exercises is still at the forefront of what we do every day. We need that talent. We need to rise up that next generation of cybersecurity and now data science engineers. It is so important as we move together in the space with our acumen, but certainly bringing in industry, academia, and government together. And I believe constant simulation, constant tabletop, constant testing, specifically in the data science area of our ethics and our review of data governance moving forward, is going to be key to the modernization of the CIO leader. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sally. And if I could ask you, I mean, are you seeing, as we think about how the changing demands and making sure we are focusing on impact, are you also changes in how people lead? I mean, or how do they actually motivate their teams when it comes to involving data, information, and technology too? Are you seeing changes there?
I'm seeing incredible changes. Thank you, David. Recently, I hosted a forum on diversity and women's leadership. And it was just absolutely breathtaking to have the head of diversity for the Space Force, head of diversity for Air Force, head of cybersecurity in that domain come to us not only as women, but as diverse leaders and how they want to rise up diverse groups of thought. And we know within data science that is key to understanding as we query and model the data, what are we seeing and how are we pushing that data to make live decision making? Thank you.
Well said, and I want to thank you, Sally, for all that you're doing to actually champion women in cybersecurity, women in AI, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, the empirical data shows, going back to some studies in 2002, diverse perspectives lead to better outcomes. And actually, the other thing that also is recognized, and I want to acknowledge here on the panel too, that if you want to have better outcomes, make sure you have a higher ratio of women to men. We will work on that, but we recognize and we really appreciate everything you're doing on that, Sally. And that's a good segue to another longtime friend and colleague, Joanne Lowe, who's also doing work with the Department of Defense on AI. I'd be interested in your perspectives, Joanne, on how and why it's so important that we lead with impact when we think about information-intensive activities like that done by CIOs, as well as others and C-suite leaders like yourself as a CEO.
Sounds good. Thank you, David, for the intro, and thank you for including me in this very impressive panel. I seem to be seeing a video lag. Am I doing okay?
You're doing okay on audio. I think proceed. Okay. You're all good.
All right, cool. So brief intro. My name is Joanne Lowe, CEO and founder of Elysian Labs. We focus on having a core capability of determining combat effectiveness of any physical and mental combat actions across all domains. And using that core capabilities, we work with users on the ground to design products and services for the DoD. And a lot of our products are right at the interface of human-machine teaming. So a lot of what you guys said about qualia and learning and training, those are things that we are very much are concerned about as well, or very much paying attention to, just even needing to be participating in that area more to get technology more absorbed in the DoD. In terms of why do we need to focus on impacts on products or design processes, first of all, I would probably define the word impacts a little further for my answer. So I think we should define impacts as some clear qualitative and quantitative metrics that can be used to hold everybody in the process accountable, not in a judgmental way, but in a neutral, without judgment way, so that we can learn from our experiences. I think it's important to focus on clearly defined impact metrics that you can stand by, because the world, like everybody has been talking about, is really noisy. Whatever you want to do, there will be somebody out there patting you on the head. They will give you some money, they will like your post, they will give you something in return if you want it. So at the end of the day, do you want your impacts to be increase the number of clicks on some website, or do you want your impact to be improving the math literacy of some lower kids from the lower income neighborhoods? Whatever it is, it's important to define it clearly and be honest and reflective about whether you have reached it, and whether you can stand by the impact that you have generated in the world. And I think as a private company CEO, I would say money and customers will come after you have defined yourself. So.
Excellent. And if I could ask you as a quick rejoinder, Joanne, so obviously as you interact with government customers, and sometimes some say it's harder in the government sector to have that immediate ROI as opposed to the private sector, which is, are you bringing in? What are you seeing in terms of trends, in terms of what are they thinking about in terms of their metrics that you can share? Are there some examples that you can share with our audience?
So when I chose my path to be in the government, I actually was in the government for a long time before I made that decision, and I've decided that there are monsters everywhere, and I just happen to know the monsters in the government. So I don't think the monsters in the government are worse than what I experienced in private sectors when I was there. There's a lot of people are keeping say they want more effective systems. They want to use data that better. I think we can all read. There's an AI strategic initiatives. There's a lot of strategic documents being sent out. I think there's a lot of useful conversations, such as this one talking about where AI and where data sciences is going in the government. I think when it comes to practical operational settings, the guidance are less clear. So when we say explainable AI, are you going to provide a team of E5s trying to read through the results and how are the results right? Like, have you defined if the results are right or not? So just defining what right looks like is actually something that we work with our customers a lot on. And so we will start with convincing the customers that we have to sit down to talk about what's right. And then we will say, please give us more time to work on the requirements with you. So it's a little bit of a learning process for all of us.
Excellent. I appreciate it. And I see, Sally, you have additional thoughts. So I'll let Sally jump on in with an additional thought with that too. Thank you, Joanne. Sally?
Joanne, amazing to start with mission. I love it. I don't think we could top that. This is phenomenal. Thank you for that leadership. It's really incredible to put the best foot forward. I want to say, Joanne, to you that Dorothy Aronson at the National Science Foundation is slam dunking it with identifying that challenge and bringing the whole team into the data science problem set. And I think that more and more as she shares what she's been doing at NSF throughout the federal civilian agencies, we all too at DoD can learn from her, especially when she brings everyone to the table for the data science problem. All of the C-suite, all of the leaders, including back to CIO and impact. When you have all the folks at the table trying to create that solution with our data science, we need everyone involved in how this moves forward. And I think we can all learn from Dorothy. She is one of my leaders in the space, and I look forward to bringing her into the GeoTech family as well. Thank you, David. Thank you, Joanne.
Well, thank you, Sally. And yes, kudos to Dorothy, and especially leading the way, as you said, as she is at the NSF, and what we can learn from there. So thanks for that. And that's a good segue as we go from thinking about AI and data now to also making sure that data is protected, not misused and abused, to Dr. Pablo Brewer. Pablo, really glad you could join us. Obviously, longtime colleague as well. Interested in your thoughts about, from the side of cybersecurity as well as resilience of systems. Why is it so important that we should also think about impact for these information-intensive activities?
Thanks so much, David, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for having me again. The great thing about going last is I don't have to come up with any new points. I get to really recover and repackage what my other esteemed panelists said. Really, it's about being a technologist, being a CIO is not about the technology. It's really about, as Sally and Joanne said, the people and the mission. And what happens a lot of times is the customer, the operations side of the house, will come to you and say, I need to use this technology. I want to data science all these things. I want a blockchain. I want to deep learning AI, ML. And what they know about those technologies is what they've seen from vendors. And so we as technologists and innovators, our job is really to embed ourselves with that customer and really conduct a bit of an ethnographic study as to what is it that you're trying to do? Where are your hard questions? Where are your problems? And then come back with a solution that gets them to their desired end state of things are better, faster, cheaper, more effective. And part of that is that we have to be able to explain to them what risk they are accepting by implementing tools. Certainly, anytime that you execute any operation, I've got a history as active duty member of DoD, so our consequences oftentimes can be tragic if things don't go well. and nothing is risk proof. So really it's here's a level of risk that you are currently accepting. Here's the level of risk that you're going to accept if we do these things. Is that risk acceptable? And if it's not acceptable, then we come back and we suggest other either tactics, techniques, procedures, or technologies to lower the latent risk to something that is acceptable. But now everybody understands where the holes are in the technology and the processes. And we innovate in a way to solve a problem as opposed to innovate just to implement technology.
Well said. And I think that was a good way to sort of recognize that it is about thinking about you want to do the operation, but you also want to think about the risk of implementing new technologies there. Not to put you on a spot, but could you share maybe one of the hardest conversations you've had to have about cybersecurity in a way, you don't have to disclose names or anything like that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm sure there's always a lot of hard conversations when someone really wants something or they really don't want something and you're trying to help them understand the art of the possible.
Oh dear. Yeah, so I was in Afghanistan very, very early on in the war. So I was there in 2004, 2005. And we were just getting to the point where our information systems could stream live video from our drones. And of course, everybody wanted that video. And so there were some very hard discussions that were had about how those videos were protected, how the encryption systems worked, and where data leakage might occur for real-time video for active operations in a way that may or may not be accessible by the adversary. And so we had those discussions and decisions were made. And then as circumstances popped up throughout the war and our adversary adjusted, we had to go back and adjust our expectations and our technology. But none of this is static. Being an innovator is about never being satisfied. And as Joanne mentioned, measuring the effectiveness of your solutions and measuring the risk of your solutions. And I'm going to steal a Donald Rumsfeldism. You know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know. So there are always unknown unknowns, and you have to adjust to those.
Well said. I appreciate that, Pablo. And I'm going to real quick go to Nagesh before I go to Joanne for the next round of questions, because Nagesh, you obviously heard everyone's thoughts, and I guess you had both the advantage of going first, but I'd be interested in were there takeaways that you took from what folks said, and maybe even examples that you can share from what you're doing in practice right now with the federal government? Yeah,
it's people first. Right? Like at the end of the day, I think that's the key point I'm hearing from everyone is it's people first, right? And what's interesting too about the people first focus is we have a very multi-generational workforce now, right? If you notice that my dad is retiring this year, but he's 80 years old. He was still practicing medicine until recently. He's now going to be closing up practice at the end of the year. But you've got a very multi-generational workforce, and you have people in the workforce who remembered pen and paper, who remembered the introduction of typewriters into the workforce, and then rotary telephones, and then cordless phones, and then from cordless phones it was fax machines, and then desktops, laptops. Think about. I was having this conversation recently with the AFCEA group. Most folks don't understand the history a little bit about how Gov IT came about. It's now this multi-billion, almost $1 trillion industry. I forgot what the number is. It's insane.
A lot, yeah.
but so just curious, does anyone know when State Department got email?
I'm going to say 90s, but I'm probably wrong.
2000s.
2000s.
Oh.
It was Secretary Powell, our Eisenhower Fellow Chairman Emeritus, David. Yeah, it was under Secretary Powell's watch that they finally got email. A lot of those government agencies didn't even have email. I remember this because in 2004, when I first entered my first stint of federal service as a GS7 over at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, as a patent examiner, they had just introduced, over the last few years, computers and the whole suite of initial applications for patent examination work. And so it was fascinating to watch that, because everyone I was working with was like, oh yeah, this is the new process now. We're still acclimating to it. Timesheets were still done by hand for the first couple of years. It was really funny. And then, when I jumped back and forth in government or federal sector, whatnot, I'd hit these time warps. When I arrived at BIS, they were still on Windows 7 devices.
And what year was this? Just to help our audience, what year was this?
When I joined BIS?
Yeah.
Oh, last June.
Right. Yeah. Just to put in perspective, still running Windows 7.
When I arrived in June of last year, I was like stunned at how far behind everyone was. It was like on the technology stack of 2000, 2004, and they hadn't done any real movement forward. And so that was where I had to step in and really, spend we spent 9 months literally birthing a new, means of operation. Now we're much better shape. Like our equipment, hardware, tech stack is up to current standards, right? I got everyone on Windows 10, able to work in remote work setting before we couldn't. When I first arrived, the email wasn't even working properly. Now we're in the cloud with that. But it took a village, and it took a lot of cooperation, collaboration, and in particular for our instance, with our platforms, I had to go and talk to folks outside of commerce because we were hitting some thorny issues that commerce had never seen before, because we're a really unique bureau within commerce, and so our settings were a lot different than the rest of the other bureaus at commerce. And so, but it boils all the way back down to a really simple premise, and that is the people, the mission. Right. And it gets really interesting, and I don't want to monopolize time further, but I'll just say this because I saw on a listserv recently, I'm on the D44 listserv, there was this back and forth about the JEDI contract and all that stuff. And I just heard everyone out. I didn't get involved too much, but the one thing I did say was it was enlightening. But I said, it's funny because there's the USG mission, there's the commerce mission, and there's the BIS mission. And so I have to fulfill my duties for all these different missions. And sometimes they come into abutting heads because of different policy machinations that happen. And so it boils right back down to the people and making sure we're addressing the needs of the people. I'll pause there. Did we lose David? I hope not.
I don't know, but I'm going to jump in. Nagesh, I think that your leadership and your vision is what makes it happen. And I'm okay with saying that. Yes, I know it takes a village, and there were people around your table, very, very, very smart people and hardworking and service to our country. But it is so clear, Pablo, I'm not sure, and Joanne, but if you would agree with me, but when you have greatness like yourself, Nagesh, a lot can get done. And we did see that with Cheryl Instagrat at Department of Energy in the last administration. We saw what she could do for data science. And so I have to say that there aren't a lot of Nageshes in the world. And so I hope that you set that standard for leadership of a CIO who can really make those changes into modernization. So thank you.
No, thank you, Sally. It's humbling to hear, and that's why I laughed, because I don't look. I'm the guy who wants to go, those networking events and stuff like that. I get really uncomfortable really fast, and I want to leave. I'm the guy who wants to be at a dive pizza bar with 2 slices of pizza and a cherry cola. And when I go to those networking events and I don't see the pizza or the cherry cola, I get really annoyed very quickly. And I'm like, I really literally will go on. My wife can attest to it. She has witnessed me gonna go, I want my pizza and my cola. So thank you. But again, I think part of it too is just making people feel like they're relevant, right? We want them to feel relevant. We want them to feel empowered. We want them to feel like that they're being heard. And at the end of the day, if there's a difference of opinion, that's okay. You're supposed to have difference of opinions, but best decision path. You put all the data points on the table and you go with the best decision based on the data.
And I think I'd like to bring Joanne in here for a minute, and Pablo with our Department of Defense work. Isn't it absolutely amazing when you have the commander wanting the technology, speaking about the technology, demanding the technology? And what's so fantastic, Joanne, I'd love you to respond, is how can they help their staff help themselves? It's so hard sometimes for the staff to get those tools and those capabilities. And it's such a struggle sometimes. How do you work with that, Joanne?
It's great that you brought that up, because I had some struggles the other day talking to somebody who is fringely working with the DoD, but not so deeply as we all are. He said, oh, you don't worry about the operators, go get the commanders to write you a letter. And all of a sudden I got like really offended about that. And then I went home and I said, why was I offended about that? Because he was right. But when I thought more about my reaction, I realized that what I wanted to look for in that commander is I wanted to work with the users, help them, collaborate with them to find the right solution, and find the commander who listens to the users, and then as a commander, support his people by setting initiatives to make that reality. And so when somebody just said, just look for a commander to send you a letter, I got offended because, I never thought it should be top down. I thought it should be bottom up and then top supported. But yes, it is amazing that when you do get that commander who listens to the ground and find the strategic initiative to support everybody to help them elevate themselves, things just get done so much faster in the DoD. So.
And Pablo, would you like to share some thoughts on, I call them the SMEs, Joanne's calling them the operators. Nagesh, you could be calling them your workforce. Could you speak a little bit about that bottom up that Joanne is referring to and how important it is that our operators want this new, fresh lab, intense innovation, modernization work, and how they work with someone? And not everybody is a Nagesh. Not everybody is going to be open-minded and thoughtful and generous in kindness to their workers. What are your thoughts on that, Pablo?
Thanks, Ellie. So, again, I'm going to be echoing what you and Nagesh and Joanne said. A lot of times it really comes down to realizing that as a CIO, you are a customer-centric title. Unless you're working for, and I'm going to show my age here, Novell or Google, the technology is not the product. The operations are the product. So the only reason for the technology to exist is to make operations easy. I transitioned last year from active duty military to the private sector. And one of the things that I always got to ask is, how do you integrate with the team? How do you make the technology and explain the technology to the team? And my answer is, I don't explain the technology. If I am going to a CEO or a commanding general and I'm talking about IP addresses and symmetric and asymmetric encryption, they're not computer scientists. They're not technologists. They need to fire that person and find somebody that's going to speak to them in terms of operations. My job is to understand the operational needs. What do those operators want? What do the mission people want? Where are their challenges? And then I find a technology solution to make it easier. But you hire technology to solve your problems, not to teach you technology. Now, that said, and I'm going to embarrass a mentor of mine. I was lucky enough when I worked, when I was active duty, to be at U.S. Cyber Command working for Major General Brett Williams, who's now himself retired. And one of my favorite memories is, I think I was a lieutenant commander at the time in a room full of generals getting dirty looks because why is this young mid-career officer in there? And we're talking about a recent incident, and the general goes off and starts talking about very technical things. And he stops mid-sentence and he looks through all the generals and colonels and he looks at me and he goes, Pablo, did I get that right or did I mess that up? Sir, that wasn't quite right. And he goes, great, come to my office afterward, let's do chalk talk. But that ability for leaders to recognize what they know and what they don't know and have the trust in their subject matter experts to go, great, explain it to me in a fashion that I understand enough to make an educated decision and an informed decision is critical.
I would put in there also, I think what's going to be most critical is being able to have that self-awareness to break down wants versus needs, right? You may want something, but it may not be what you need. And you need to be able to distinguish between those two.
Nagesh, that's a great point. And one of the things that I routinely do, and I train and mentor people to do the same thing, is when you're talking to the customer or the boss and you're giving them a recommendation, there are some questions you need to answer. What do I gain if I do this? What do I lose if I do this? What does it cost? And cost isn't necessarily monetary. It's convenience, it's effort, it's all sorts of things. And then the last one is, what do I care? Why do I care about the thing that you're telling me? And if you can't show that impact and why your customer should care about this new thing, then you've lost it. What do I gain and what does it cost is not sufficient for somebody to make an informed decision.
I think that is a highlight. David, let me just jump in here. That is huge, monumental, Pablo. I think you've really captured what David wants us to talk about today, which is the CIO and the focus on impact. And I love that you said that. You know, why do I care? And the resources and the time and the efficiencies, usually it's not about the acquisition, the procurement, the money, the budget. It's about, do we really want to do this? And that's going back to Nagesh and saying, yeah, if the leader has the vision and the responsibility, who believes in his team, right? What you just said, the trust, who believes in the team and wants them to do this, right? Trial and error, back to Joanne, your work, your incredible work in data science. Very difficult here, very difficult. Thank you, David.
No, of course. Well said, Sally. And thank you also for being co-pilot while the Zoom cloud was apparently doing something. I'm not exactly sure. I could see me, but I'm not sure you all saw me and vice versa. But I really appreciate you being on co-pilot for helping with that. And you can be my wing person anytime. Building on what you all were saying, one of the also challenges that aside from, again, talking about the technology's capabilities as opposed to technology specifically, is there's always a risk that sometimes an organization will embrace a new capability through technology and data and not update how it actually operates, that it still uses the same old processes and things like that. And so I was thinking maybe if I could go to Joanne and then to any of the other panelists, that what have you seen in cases where a process did have to be rethought or the way people worked had to be rethought, or examples of where the old process collided with new technology and it didn't exactly work well? Joanne, over to you.
Sure. This question is precisely why I chuckled a little bit when Nagesh said, you know, the customer needs to know what they need instead of just what they want, because that's exactly what's happening in innovation sometimes. Is we want the shiny things, but we forget to build up the fundamentals to integrate the shiny things. So a lot of times I think innovation is good. All the innovation that is happening right now is great. We require some level of tinkering in the system in order for inventors to know what would work in the real systems and what would not. So that's a necessary process in invention. But we also need to do the hard work of integrating those innovations and finding what the one thing that works. We need to be okay with 99% of that stuff is not going to work, and funnel that 1% and really work hard on integrating that into the system. And in the DoD, and I imagine for the whole of government as well, that requires thinking through the entire .mil.pf. So doctrine, operationals, supplies, and everything. So right now, we keep saying, you know, we want communications that connects everything. We want automated systems. We want all these things. But how does that change the force structure? How does that change the training from the ground up? How does that change basic training, the mentality of leadership, as one of you guys mentioned before? So those are the hard questions that are very difficult to come to one conclusion, very difficult to agree upon, and very unglamorous because everybody wants to do the shiny things. And unless leadership actually decide that that is what they want to focus on and put incentive in place to make that an important goal, we might just keep chasing the shiny things forever and nothing will get integrated into the whole of system. And that would be sad. So.
Well said. And maybe Nagesh, I know you and I over the years have had long-term conversations that the substantive behind the scenes work often sometimes gets neglected. I'd be interested in your thoughts both on that. And then also, I mean, how many of us have ever had that mandate where we're given, I want you to be innovative, but at the same time, don't disrupt anything, or don't, and it's like, wait a minute, these two kind of go together. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Nagesh, both about doing the work of substantive and what do you get when you're told that the organization wants you to be innovative, but not disrupt anything.
Yeah, on the former, it's funny because I remember in 2013 when I was getting recruited back into the federal service, a few folks at grad pulled me aside and said, don't take the job. It was working on the SBIR program stuff, and it was like there was a pretty big mess that I had to clean up, and they had like grabbed me and said, you don't want to take that job, you're going to be set up for failure, and it's really bad, and blah blah blah. And I was like, no, I think this is a diamond in the rough. It just needs some polishing, and needs some nurturing, and it needs to be shined up. And just because it's boring doesn't mean it's not impactful or fulfilling. And and it's just that same way. I think it's in the eye of the beholder a little bit, right? And then the substantiveness, I think, is far more crucial and important, because that's the stuff that goes long term and sustaining. I'd be curious to hear Joanne, Pablo, or Zayali, your thoughts on that. I think people are always trying to chase the shiny object, but shiny objects, tend to have that they tend to have that like short-term like standing, whereas you want something that's going to be long-term and foundational, because that's what's going to, like, when you have good soil in the ground, you can reap a lot more variety of crops. My farm analogy. So I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts around all that.
Nagesh, if I can just jump in here real quick. I also recently picked on a job on top of running my company for the government. Very much, I'm sure, much smaller scale than the one that you picked up, but very much a cleaning up thing, building foundation and type of job. And a lot of people were saying the same thing to me as well. Don't take that job. It's horrible. You're setting up yourself up for failure. It's not going to work. And so that makes me want to do it, basically. But I'm very looking forward to that. And I totally agree with you that a lot of the innovations are being built on sand right now. Even the good ones. I think some of us here don't want to see that go to waste, and want to come in and do the hard work to build a good foundation for everything to grow on. So.
Yeah, if I could add to that. So I spent a career in the DoD, so I lived a career of innovate, but don't change strategy or doctrine, which doesn't really work. The US DoD in particular is a zero defect mentality. So Joanne's point about if you want to innovate, you have to be okay with accepting a high degree of failure until you get a winning strategy. Is also very applicable. And so I think the DoD has done a pretty good job of starting to change things. I was lucky enough, Joanne actually and I met at my last active duty tour at SoftWorks, which is US SOCOM's innovation space. And when I was actually delayed my retirement to go there. And when they said, hey, look, we do innovation in government, I told them they were lying in not so genteel terms. And then I explained that 85% of advanced projects in Silicon Valley fail within 6 months. And were they okay with that? And to their credit, they said yes, and they actually held to that. So that was tremendously helpful. The other bit about chasing the shiny object, that is true whether you're in government or somewhere else. And one of the things that I've picked up along the way that's been very helpful is not explaining what the technology can do, but explaining the limitations of the technology. And so part of my job is not only keeping up with the latest and greatest information on quantum and on data science and AI and ML. There's always a 4 or 5 buzzwords of the year. You can usually figure out what they are by going to RSA. But having easy to digest documentaries and books that you can hand leadership and go, okay, you want to ask about AI and ML, go watch Coded Bias on Netflix, or here's Kathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math Destruction, that explains in very easy to understand terms where things can go horribly awry with these technologies. So collecting these books that the layperson could read for themselves and understand, I understand that AI is really there to augment my intelligence as opposed to a generalized AI that can answer all of my problems goes a long way.
Well said, Pablo. And as we get closer to the end, one of the questions that I want to also ask, and maybe I don't want to put you on a spot, Nagesh, but since you're currently working with the government, some of the times the challenge is you have things you can be flexible on when it comes to process, and some of it is laws. And as we know, the laws are not updated at the same speed that let alone processes or technology are updated as well. And so how do you make the case sometimes if a law itself or an existing, maybe something at the Federal Register or something like that needs to also be updated, and how do you address it? Is that something you elevate up to the department head? I mean, how do you build a coalition if maybe possibly how things are being done codified in law or with the Federal Register also needs to be updated too?
Yeah, laws are laws, right? It's funny, when I was doing my master's in IP law, I remember my contracts law professor had said, laws are meant to be broken.
Uh-oh.
It was very amazing. It was like the last end of class because, we were doing, it was a one-year master's I did, but I took a couple of the 1L classes because I wanted to just understand how it worked, even though I was focused on IP law primarily. And, but it was like the last day of class, and he just kind of said, with the IRAC method and everything, right? Issue, rule of law, application of law, and the conclusion that you come forth. He was like, sometimes laws are meant to be broken. Now, I'm not advocating we break the law. I'm not, as a federal civil servant, I'd be remiss. I need to say I'm not advocating you break the law, but what I am saying is that the law is a playbook. So, sit down, understand the playbook, understand the meaning of the words, and understand, are there loopholes? Are there conflicting laws? If there are conflicting laws, bring it to light so that we can then address how to deconflict the situation. Understand the intent of words that are used in the law. I think that's been, fascinating when the words, I remember we were going through the SBIR. This is years ago. I remember I was looking at the law, and it was like these requirements that had, and people were debating whether or not they were requirements. And I said, well, what does the word say? And it said shall. And I said, okay, that reminds me of the Bible, because the convenience is the word shall, right? So that means you're required.
Shall is different than should, exactly.
Should, right. And they're like, huh. I go, if you want to go biblical, we can go biblical here. And they're like, well, it's just separation of church and state, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's irrelevant. The point is like, look at the terms, look at the understandings, and understand it. It's why I tell folks all the time is like, read the law, like read it, understand the words. And because when legislators legislate, there's a reason why they legislate the way they do. They are inserting little tidbits and nuggets of loophole capability when they feel like there might be conflicting policies that forecast down the road that they can't control or prevent.
Well said.
That's my 2 cents. Yeah.
And I can remember there was an activity we did back in 2010 where it took one executive order, and we actually ended up drawing a diagram of the interconnectedness. And we realized that when, even one executive order, there are sometimes parts that were written on different people. So there was one part that said the head of the National Science Foundation shall meet with the president, period. And then say on what topic, it just said shall meet with the president. It's like, talk about the weather or something like that. And so, there's a very human activity. And I'll go to one last human activity before I go to the lightning round. And this is for Pablo. We have a question that came in that said, how can we improve cyber awareness beyond just typical online cyber training modules, which the question asker, Deborah, is asking and saying a lot of online cyber modules are ineffective. So how do you recommend, in a real short format, improving cyber awareness?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. I get it a lot. Cybersecurity is not about the technology. It's a cultural question. If I send enough spear phishing emails, I'm going to get anybody. I've been doing this for a long time. I still click on the occasional spear phishing email. The trick is not to just have a stick. It's also to have a carrot. So one of the best examples of that is we've all worked at facilities where you have to display your badge. I had a friend of mine who was the chief security officer at one such facility, and he took to not wearing his badge, and the first person that stopped him he would hand a gift certificate to a local restaurant to.
Huh.
And that became so popular that he literally couldn't go anywhere without being looked at by employees going, is that person wearing their badge? And so it ended up becoming a secret shopper thing. But then nobody got offended if they got challenged for wearing their badge. They realized it was a positive game with a positive output. And the same thing for tailgating, and the same thing for clicking on spearfishing. You know you're winning, you know you're doing cybersecurity right when people self-report, because it's the right thing to do without fearing that they're going to get in trouble. Hey, I found a thumb drive and I know I wasn't supposed to put it in, but I put it in. Oh, hey, I forgot my cell phone and I brought it into a secured facility. And when they self-report without fearing that they're getting in trouble for making a simple human mistake, that's when you're winning. So it's really about culture. We all do those computer-based trainings. They're never fun. They're particularly not fun if you're in DoD and they haven't been updated in 15 years. But it's really, again, it's people first.
Well said. And I also have to chuckle sometimes when the security training is using Flash, and I'm like, so many things I could say, but I won't. Anyway, thank you for that, Pablo. Okay, so now we're at the lightning round, and this is where we go to everybody and we ask you for 2 to 3 tweet length next steps based on everything we've talked about here. It could be for public sector, private sector leaders, but sort of what are the 2 to 3 takeaways that you recommend from the conversation we had? I'm going to go first to Pablo, since that's how we wrap things up in the beginning. Pablo, for your thoughts for 2 to 3 tweet length recommendations for leaders in this space, based on the changing information environment and how we can lead successfully.
People first, mission always. Talk to the people. You've got a customer. They've got concerns. They've got challenges, technologies to solve those things. It's not there to exist in and of itself. So if you're innovating for the sake of innovation, you're doing it wrong. Solve the problems of your customers.
Very well said, and you seem to have definitely demonstrated your skills at getting the bullet points to tweet length. So I appreciate that, Pablo. Thank you, Joanne. Now interested in your thoughts as to what are 2 to 3 takeaways we can have on the conversation we had here. Oh, and you may be muted.
I'm back. Okay, so my tweet length would be in a quick changing environment. Don't waver on your strategic goal, but be responsive to your environment. It's very much slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So,
well said. And I can tell you have worked a long time with the Department of Defense when you recognize that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So very well said. All right. So Sally, your thoughts as to what are 2 to 3 takeaways we can have on making sure, as whether CIOs or C-suite leaders in information intensive activities, how can we best lead forward with impact?
For our CIOs in the federal space, in data science, which is what I am focusing my attention on, I would say that cybersecurity has to be reevaluated and reinstituted on a national security level. So what folks are doing at Fort Meade needs to be in the queries, the model development. And what I'm working on right now is federated machine learning, where you are not moving the data. If it's not encrypted, you are moving the algorithms. That is very important that we reinstate security into data science. Number 2, workforce training. Empower our people. Get them excited. Allow them to get more degrees and certs all day long. And of course, my 3rd is testing, simulation, and tabletops. Tabletops are key to success to see how we move forward quickly. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the perspective, and I agree with you. Federated approaches is definitely going to be something that's going to be key, both to governments, because obviously we do operate in different organizational and different security classifications, things like that, but also for large organizations that want to operate globally and they want to be respectful of different rules for different data sets for different countries. So really appreciate it, Sally, in that way forward. And last, Nagesh, if you could bring us home as a current CIO serving with the government and the administration, what are your takeaways as to 2 to 3 next steps we could have on making sure we lead with impact?
I think it's imperative that leaders lead with conviction. That's got to be part of your ethos. And 2, don't make a decision without walking in the footsteps of don't make a decision without walking in the shoes of your stakeholders.
Very well said. And yes, you're absolutely right. There's that phrase from President Lincoln that says, you need to recognize that even the people that you may not like, you at least get to know them better. And there's something to be said for all stakeholders, because of course in public service, we're serving all, but the same is true for private sector organizations too. Make sure we are aware of our different stakeholders. So with that, I want to thank our panelists for a very robust conversation today. This has been an exciting look towards the future ahead, especially given the key role that CIOs and other information-intensive C-suite leaders are going to be playing, and recognizing that it is about information as we led. It is about not just the technology and making sure that we are first and foremost people-centric as we address that. I want to thank our audience for joining us today for yet another GeoTech Hour. And as always, we'd like to encourage everyone to please be bold, please be brave, and please be benevolent for the future ahead. I'll see you next time.